Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. We're going to learn the Maimer of Tetzaveh of 40 years ago, which was said on this evening, Thursday night, the night before the 7th of Adar, the Parsha of Tetzaveh. On the Shabbos, the Rebbe said the Maimer of Zohar as Asher also Amalek. So we'll learn that, God willing, next week. That's also in connection to Purim, and we'll be able also do the Purim Maimer. So we'll have two, God willing, for next week, and the subsequent week we'll have a bunch. So some weeks we'll have two through Pesach, Billy Nader, with God's help. So this is a very interesting Maimer, as every Maimer is, and it also gives us certain strength, power, and energy. And I just want to point out before we continue that the last Maimer that the Rebbe did give us, that he distributed and he gave us, he edited, was from 4 years before this of Purim Cotton, which also begins with this Dibra Maschil, the beginning of the same verse. There are a few of the, of course, connected ideas. So you may be familiar with that Maimer. You may notice a little bit some of the nuances. And then this Maimer speaks about the fundamental aspects of prayer and Torah study within our lives and how that bolsters the relationship that we have with the Holy One, blessed be He. So the Maimer begins with the beginning verse of this week's Parsha, and you shall command the children of Israel, and they shall take to you oil, olive oil, which is pure, crushed, so that it may be able to illuminate, and that they may be able to, the word here is laha, lois, to uplift, but it means to burn, a constant, continuous light, candle. Then the next verse of Be'oihel Moyed Goimer, the tent of convening, Yarechesi Aaron Uvonov, Aaron and his sons will set it up, Me'erev ad Boiker, from evening till the morning, Lifnei Havaya, before God. So this is a reference to the mitzvah of the kindling of the menorah in the sanctuary and subsequently in the temple, in the Beis HaMikdash, and how this would have to be prepared. And there would have to be oil in order to kindle these lights. Also, famously, although the Rebbe doesn't go into it in detail here, the name of Moses is not mentioned in this week's Parsha at all, and a lot has been discussed about that. The word va'ato and you means your essence, but the Rebbe will address another lesson of what this word va'ato teaches us. But it's a reference to Moses, that Moses should do it. We know the specific lessons and questions and answers, and how our Rabbeim, the leaders of the generations, expounded on these topics and ideas. Since the mitzvah was for Aaron, the Kohen, that he set up the candles and kindled them, then why did God command to Moses they should take the oil to you, that you should take the oil? From that it seems like they would have to bring the oil to Moses, although Aaron is the one who had to kindle and set it up. His brother Aaron, the high priest, not only the high priest and his children, the Kohanim. And we also have to understand why, particularly and suddenly over here, it says, and you shall command the children of Israel, the Koyal Moshe Rabbeinu, referring to Moses, our teacher. The whole Torah in its entirety was given through Moses and by Moses. He commanded the children of Israel all of the mitzvahs. He gave them over all the mitzvahs in the whole Torah. So then why in particular are we stressing that Moses should go and command the people here for this one? He commanded every mitzvah. And especially since this is a mitzvah that's specifically for Aaron. So why is this something that God speaks to Moses? The Tetzaveh, and we say more than in other places, and you shall command. So really Moshe did this. Why is this reserved for this particular mitzvah? Gam Yadua Hadiuk de Beposek Horishan. Gabe Vikhu Lecho El Meshek Siv Lahalis Netomid. Now, there's also something interesting that we find here. There are two aspects, two details of the kindling of the lights, and the one is given over by the part of the command that's for Moses, and one is for Aaron. So by the part about Moses, it says, L'halis ne'tomid, that there should be a continuous light being uplifted and kindled. And in the second verse, regarding Aaron, it says, Me'erev Baker, from evening till morning bilvad. That's all it says. It doesn't say the continuous thing. So it says continuous to Moses, and it says from evening till morning for Aaron. Here's the explanation. Hine tachlis avedas adam hi lasas kesher amitz v'yichud nifla ben Yisrael l'kutshabrichu. Behold, the ultimate purpose of a person's service of God and serving the Creator is to make a strong bond, a knot, and a phenomenal fusion, a connection between Israel and the Holy One, blessed be He. That's what it's about. Because the Holy One, blessed be He, and Israel are like a groom and a bride. We're a couple. So there has to be a strong bond. And therefore, just like a groom and a bride, in the regular sense, have to have two shushvinin, which are loosely translated as escorts, someone who brings them, who accompaniment, a wedding. We also in Yiddish we call them the unterfehrers, the ones who bring them down to the actual wedding. In times of the Talmud also it means the people who took responsibility and who arranged, etc., etc. And part of this is because there's a certain when it comes to marriage or developing any relationship, no two people are the same, and therefore no one is exactly relative to each other. Again, no one's the same. So since they're not the same, they need a little encouragement, so to speak. People are apprehensive, etc. So you have the Shashvinim, the wedding party. For Shashvina, so Shashvina Shalachosn Hanikra Shashvina de Malka Shahu maybe it's a Chosn Elakala. So therefore, because there's this apprehensiveness, etc., and about a wedding, so there's the escort of the Chosn, who's called the escort of the king. He is the one who brings the groom to the Kala, to the bride. And then there's the escort of the bride, who is called the escort of the queen. They bring the bride to the groom. Same idea applies to Israel and the Holy One, blessed be He, which are also the groom and the bride. There is the escort of the king and the escort and companion of the queen. The Meish Shoshvina de Malka, the Aaron who Shoshvina de Matrinisa. Like it says in the Holy Zohar, that Moses is the escort of the king, meaning he brings God, and Aaron was the escort of the queen of the Jewish people. And that's why specifically in regards to Aaron, it says when you will kindle the candles, not in this parsha when it speaks about it in Numbers. The Hine Klolos in Hanedes Koyal Nishmas Yisrael. Generally speaking, when we speak about the lights, the candles, that's a reference to the souls of Israel. Like it says in Proverbs, that the candle of God is the soul of man. Especially the candles of the candelabra. It's explained at length in the Likutei Torah of the Alter Rebbe, in the portion of Bahal Loischa, where it has the mitzvah of the kindling of the candles. The 7 branches of the candelabra of the menorah, and the lights of the menorah. They are the 7 types of souls that Israel has. The inyan halos hanedes ayidei Aaron hipulosei shel Aaron b'nishmas Yisrael, and the uplifting of the candles through Aaron, meaning the kindling of the lights, is the act of Aaron and the effect of Aaron in the souls of Israel. Ki inyan shel Aaron hu shushvina the matronisa. Aaron's task is to be the companion, the escort of the queen. To uplift the bride, which is Israel, to the groom, who is the Holy One, blessed be He, God Almighty. What is this in serving God, in our service? What is that? That's the service of prayer, praying. Prayer is uplifting from below to above. We elevate ourselves. And we've discussed this in several of the Mamorim, that the prayer is compared to the ladder, which is lodged in the ground, and its head reaches into the heavens, so that it could uplift everything. Even what's lodged in the ground, but it could get into the heaven, penetrate heaven. This is a reference to the service of God with prayer. Whereas Moses is the escort and the companion of the king, he has to draw down and bring down the groom, which is the Holy One, blessed be He, to Israel, which is the bride. That's why Moses gave the Torah, because the Torah and God is all one. Now it also says the third partner there in that troika is the Jewish people, but it's all one thing because we're united through this. So the Rebbe continues like through the giving of the Torah, the chosin is brought down, and that is the Holy One, blessed be He. That's how we get our relationship and grasp of God. And when we serve God, that's our study of Torah study, the Torah in Yonah Hamshacham Lamata, and then we're bringing down from the supernal realms to the lower realms, into our minds and into our lives and into what the Torah is talking about, to draw down the godliness from above to below, as stated earlier, Canal. And like it says that God says, I have spoken. You see, I have spoken to you from the heavens. And it says that my words are like fire. That means to say that the Torah, which is like fire, but it comes down in a way that it doesn't remain in heaven. It's like Moses tells the Jewish people, and God tells the Jewish people that the Torah is not overseas and it's not in heaven, it's accessible. It's here for you to study and to perform and to do and to serve. So now we have what this verse means, that it says, and they will take to you oil, olive oil, which is pure, clear, crushed for illumination, to kindle a continuous, constant candle flame. Oil moed, the tent of convening. Aaron and his children will set it up from evening till the morning before God. These are the two ideas above that we mentioned: the Torah, tefillah, of Torah and prayer. The Shem and Zayzoch Kosil Moil Halis Tamid, the pure olive oil which is crushed for illumination to kindle the continuous light, who in a Torah, that's a reference to Torah. That's why it has to say they will take to you, they'll bring it to you. This is why Moses comes in here. Because this is done through Moses, the escort of the king. He brought the Torah. And then to set it up. That's why the part that's about prayer, to set it up, that's Aaron. He is the escort of the bride, of the queen. How does this work? What's this about? What's it all about? The Shem and Zayizoch Lamoir Koyal Limratera. Pure olive oil for illumination, that's a reference to Torah study. And therefore, as a preparation to the Torah study, there has to be the idea of kosis, crushed. Now, this is part of the nuance that we have in the Maimer above reference that the Rebbe gave, but it means several things. But part of crushed also means submission. Submission meaning the negation of the feeling of one's own independent existence and realization that we're all part of God and submitting to that. So, the Haschola saying in the Limeratera, boy, they beat Habitl. So to begin to have Torah study properly, that comes through proper submission and subservience and understanding the rules by which then we have to submit our intellect to understand the godly intellect, the way, the logic and of the Torah, etc. It's that we should understand, but understand God's thinking and God's wisdom, etc. That comes through submission. And like we say in the last part of the Amidah, when we pray, we say, my soul shall be like dust for everything, meaning that you are totally submitting. And then afterwards we say, we ask God to open my heart in your Torah. So in other words, the introduction, the preparation is the bittul, this subservience. Regarding Moses itself, when it speaks about him in reference to the Torah, it's indeed by the name. We've had this verse mentioned many times. The different nuances here. Remember the Torah of Moshe. So it's Moshe, right? So it's indeed called the Torah of Moshe. But why? Because he's Avdi. He was my servant. He was totally whatever he did was God doing. So it's the idea of this bittul, this submission, this subservience. It had to be particularly and specifically with the submission of a slave, of a servant. This is the idea of crushed for illumination. The olive has to be crushed, so totally subservient. Totally, and then we speak about bittul, submission and subservience. So the existence, that you're a different existence, that's one thing that has to be negated. And then there's the bittul hayeshes. And then most certainly the haughtiness, that when one is haughty and one has what's called yeshes, that they're an existence of some sort, so then that has to also be shown that it's really not a real existence. It's part of a different existence, part of God and godliness. So there's one thing to subjugate, and then there's the understanding that your whole existence is part of God. So that's called bittul b'metzias, not just parts of that you're trying to get it, in line and synced up, but then that your whole being is really part of God. Shall kosis, and in a way that it is crushed completely. Like the Talmud says, there's a law that says if something is already, it's not fit for, let's say, to perform a mitzvah. Let's say someone took a shofar or something like that was used for idol worship. It can't be used for the mitzvah. Now you may say, There's a discussion in the Talmud in a couple of places about this concept. But the concept really is that if you have to perform the mitzvah of something, let's say you take a different mitzvah, it doesn't matter what it is, and then the object with which the mitzvah is performed, let's say, has to be destroyed because it was used for idol worship. So even though it's not yet destroyed, and therefore you have taken that object to perform the mitzvah, but it's already considered destroyed. It's considered as if it's already ground up to dust, because it's already. We have this concept in another very interesting way too, which the Rebbe doesn't mention here. But there's a discussion, for instance, if somebody has an injury that we know they will not survive, even though it's forbidden to kill them, heaven forbid. But it's different when somebody would do something to such a person than to somebody who's healthy, etc. And there are different reasons. It's not that it's permissible, by the way, but it's a question of how they're judged, etc., etc. So the point of this is that the object is already. It's considered as if it's already destroyed. It's as if it's already crushed. It's already pulverized into powder. So ksuse michtas shiure. So therefore, since it's considered already like dust, so then you couldn't have performed the mitzvah with it, because the mitzvah has to be performed with something of a certain size, of a certain amount, and here it's not so. So you can't do the mitzvah with it. So whatever mitzvah it may be that you're talking about. Now sometimes, like for instance, when it's talking about a lulav, so there it says that the lulav itself, since a mitzvah isn't for your benefit, so then sometimes that it's okay anyway, even though it was performed. But this is a separate discussion, which the Talmud talks about there in the both in the tractate of Sukkah and the tractate of Chulin, where it talks about this too. Okay. But the idea is total submission, that we understand from this. So the Rebbe brings this nuance. Va'oid, the hazais mitzad atzmei hu sheyesh b'miridas. By the way, the olive in and of itself is a very bitter. It's one of the most bitter fruits that there is. Do not try this at home. Do not try to eat a raw, fresh olive. I learned that the hard way. And not only is it bitter, it has a residue, and it's something that you can't handle. So it's an extremely bitter fruit, but nevertheless, its juice makes oil. And when you eat olives, it's because they have been also soaked in brine and salt. In other words, they have also been this bottle. They have been submitted to something else. It's just not the way they were to start with. So olive is very bitter. Like the dove said, and this is also in the Talmud. May my food be bitter like the olive. Like Rashi brings actually in his commentary on the verse which the Talmud is expounding upon, when it says that the dove said that. Remember the story of Noah. Noah sent out the dove. The dove came back with the olive branch. So the dove came back. It says, "V'hinei," and behold, a torn olive branch was in its mouth. So the sages said that the prayer was, let my food, let it be bitter, but as long as it comes from you, God, and I shouldn't be dependent on a human being to give it to me. That was a reference to Noah. So even if it's, as long as you have it, so it's bitter, but it's at least it's there as a steady. Instead of being sweet like honey, it says, but dependent on others. So that's the rest of that prayer. So there is an association here of olives. Interestingly, in the Talmud where it discusses it, there's a discussion of the Tetzaveh and of Rabbi Akiva Eger, which are all discussing this nuance. Is a tough one. And the Tetzaveh says that it's also a reference to the tree. The tree in and of itself is a bitter tree. And it says when there was Moses took the branch to sweeten the water. It was the place called Morah. There was an association there. And this whole idea that well, is it really bitter in essence or not? But it's associated with bitterness. Okay, that's a discussion to expound upon another time. Just want to bring it to our attention. V'gam omru Gemara Hadius, and it also says in the Talmud, in the tractate of Hadius, Shazayis Mishkech Talmud Shalayin Shona, that the olive, eating olives, actually there it says if you eat it often, can make you forget this Torah study of 70 years. Now, here the Rebbe doesn't mention it, but there in the discussion subsequently is that if you eat olive oil or drink olive oil, that can make you remember Torah study of 70 years. That's what it says in a practical sense. If you eat olives, you should eat it only if there's some olive oil with it. Then there's a discussion, do you get any olive oil automatically or not? That you have to ask your own expert. Okay, whether it's your local Orthodox rabbi or your local Orthodox rabbi who consulted with your local botanist and scientist and expert. Let's continue. Yeah. וגם אמרו בגמרא הודיש זייס משכח תלמוד של עין שונה מכל מקום הידי שכעת שני say מצין השמני. This olive is so bitter. We say all these things that it says. The dove said it. The Talmud says it, and it has to be crushed, etc. But nevertheless, through the fact that we crush it, you get the oil. It comes out. Something special comes out. So it's being crushed brings out its best. The oil doesn't only become luminous, but it becomes a source of light. It becomes a luminary. It becomes the source of the light. With the proper submission, the proper bittul within ourselves, within humanity, then the person can get the Torah. Part of receiving the Torah comes with the bittul. It's actually not only part, but it's part and parcel and primary. In a way that the Torah is drawn down from above, supernally to us on our low level. The person is not ready to be elevated to heaven, to God, to supernally, can't run and leave our level. But when we are in our spot, wherever we are, but because we submit, we get the luminary of the Torah. And that's why it says to kindle a continuous, constant flame. Here the Rebbe gives us, this is for all time and all places. This way that it comes to us is higher than any limitation of time. The Torah has no limitations of time. Look at even the obligation to study Torah. There's no specific time. As a matter of fact, the mitzvah to study Torah is continuous and constant all the time. You always have to study Torah. You can only take a break from studying Torah if you're doing something that's absolutely necessary, like making a living or doing things for someone's sustenance, to eat, to sleep, whatever it has to be. But otherwise, you have to study Torah. So then, but after it says about the Torah study, it says that Aaron will set it up from evening till morning. That refers to the serving God with prayer. The idea of prayer is to elevate and to uplift from below to above, like the analogy of fire, which goes up naturally above, as the Tanya brings, the fire, which becomes smoke, and the oil, which is in the candle, it gets consumed, and it goes up, it evaporates, and it goes up. You could actually see it in the steam and the smoke when you see a candle. There are three things here. Aleph, number one, to set it up. That Aaron has to set it up. What does that mean in our prayer? Before we pray, we have to prepare to pray in the right way. This is to contemplate. You're supposed to think about God before you pray. That's why we learn chassidus. We study before we daven so that we can think about God to set ourselves up to pray and to arrange our thoughts. Beis, b'ha'alois chasanedis, when you will kindle the flames. What does that mean? Ha'alo atzma milmatal maila. When you pray, you're already now realizing that you're raising yourself to a higher plane, to a higher level. Gimel, behitive asanedis. There's also the idea of the candles have to be, between kindlings, get cleaned out. The old wicks got taken out, new wicks got put in, etc. Hainu, and by the way, it's the same word in Hebrew to make something good, lehetiv, which is an interesting concept in and of itself. Hainu shadlokas hanedisi be'efon shanedisi idu lamata, which also illustrates the idea that the kindling of the flames illuminate everywhere to the lowest level. In other words, the candles were they got black and they burned. In other words, and they have to be changed. They have to be cleaned out, the candles, and refilled, etc. It permeates everywhere. And that's why it says from evening to morning. In prayer you have these different levels, the preparation and the doing and the work that you work on yourself and the elevating yourself. And that's why there's in prayer, generally speaking, there's the evening and the morning prayer. The uplifting from below to above, and making ourselves closer to God. When we bring ourselves closer, we bring down also the godly pleasure into ourselves. That's how it is also actually in prayer. It's not an obligation to always pray. You have to pray at certain times. It's the evening and the morning. Just like the offerings, the sacrifice in the temple. The tefillas connected to midim, connected to karbonos tiknum. The prayer was instituted in lieu of the offerings in the temple, which was every day, the evening and the morning and the evening offering. That's why it says first the piece about Moses, it'll take to you before setting up the candles, which was of Aaron. So the escort of the king comes before the escort of the queen. Just like before you pray, you have to study a little bit for the idea of prayer, to bring yourself to know, although you have to study the primary study is after. But there's a preparation study before. Additionally, you have to study to learn even in general how to pray and what are the laws of prayer. So in order to know how to pray, you have to learn the laws of prayer. And through the prayer, through the study, the prayer is like it should be. And all these three things that the Rebbe mentioned, setting up the prayer properly, and the coming closer, and the effect of the prayer. And this is what it means, an unusual command. We know that everything that we do to serve God, we need God's help. We need the help of heaven. And this is the idea that God tells Moses, and you shall command. And here, now Moses' name isn't used. It says, and you, ve'ato. Now, we always say his name isn't there because he said to erase his name. If God is not going to forgive, it's the next week's parsha. And they say that this also shows us that the cure comes before the illness, etc. But that's all how it's expounded upon. But here we have a nuance and a reason that's so special. the lifnei prate inyonim davedes achasan vavedes akala shushvina the malchus shushvina the matranisa. Before we get into all the details of what the work of the groom, and that's the idea of the Torah, and the escort of the groom, right, and the work of the bride, and that's the prayer, and the escort of the queen. We need that God should give us this ability and capability and strength and power to be able to do it, to have it. This is the idea of, and you command. The word command means to connect. It comes from the word mitzvah, comes from tzavso, which means connect. It's like we say faculty or staff, they're all connected together to do one thing. That's called tzeves in Hebrew. So command connects the commandee with the commander, right? So there's the idea of connection here in this wording. So that this therefore connects the supernal with the lower, b'chlos in a general sense, in a way that the lower gets elevated in the way that the higher is drawn down. And then we get the capability to be able to fulfill the details in everything that we have to do and carry out whatever the mission is, the Torah study and the prayer, etc. And even more and specifically, in the word va'ata, which means and you, referring to Moses, also has two things. Ois vav, the letter vav, v'tevas ato, the word ato, which means you. Kavur, Badrushim, like the Mamorim, the chassidic discourses explain, she'is vav koi al b'chinas malka, so the letter vav is a reference to the king, because vav equals 6. It's also the line that draws through, and that is the male part of the 6 spheres. And that's why it's called Zoz Erampin, the small face, which is a reference to the first 6 spheres, which are all considered the male spheres. And the word Ato, which means you, that's a reference to the queen, the female. Malchus, which Malchus is considered the female sphere, which accepts in it all the previous spheres and develops it. And then the level of Malchus is then also pervades to the next part of the chain, to the next levels. So it becomes the highest level of the next thing, just like the female in the physical sense. And from the mere fact that both of them are in one word, the male and the female ideas, aspect, so to speak. This is the idea of the union of the 6 spheres and the 7th sphere of Malchus, the male and the female, everything together. This fusion should be in a way of commanding, which connects and bonds. In the most fulfilling way possible. Like it's explained at length in the booklet called Tetzaveh that the 5th Rebbe, the Rebbe Rashab, wrote. That's also about how the study of Chassidus and how we learn in the yeshivas, etc. That's the whole idea of male and female, and the spheres of Zo and Malchus, the first 6, together with the sphere of Malchus in general. When we serve God, it's the most supernal way of the fusion of God in all of His godly elements, and the elements of God's names, and the elements of God's essence with His names, and the elements that are more understandable and more conceivable, etc. So this is Yichudei Elon, Yichudei Tato, which are discussed at length in Chassidus. These ideas of the aspects that God has to use for creation, and how He's really fused with them, and how He uses them to create, and how there are the various levels, which are called the supernal union and the lower union, etc. And this is also in the idea of Sheman, Baruch Shem, etc., as it comes down to us. May it be the will of God that through this service of the connection of prayer, of Torah and prayer, Bechinas Va'ata, this idea of and you, Chibur Vav Va'ata, Shehu Chibur Beis chibur vav ve'ato, the connection of the letter vav and the word ato. Shuhu chibur beis ha'etzim. This is actually the combination that Rebbe says here of the two trees. Ilona dechaya v'ilona detevera. The tree of life, like we have in the beginning, and the tree of knowledge that includes in it good and evil. The whole idea of the Torah, then the way it was given subsequently, is to be able to rectify and clarify and the evil in the world by its negation, and doing the good through elevating everything else. And this combination brings the idea of the life. So it has both of these trees. Like the Rebbe Rashab explains it over there in the above mentioned Kuntras, in the booklet Novi, we will come speedily, very soon, to their union in its ultimate sense, and their marriage, their wedding in its ultimate, this union, being united with the Holy One, blessed be, and the Jewish people, in an everlasting, eternal sense. In our days, actually, so and Moses and Aaron together with them, with everybody, as it says in the Talmud, and will bring all of the offerings like God commanded, and most certainly, and all the more so, the candle of the mitzvah, of the commandments, and the the lights of the candelabra, the menorah, and the lights of the sanctuary that stood in the desert, and that sanctuary which came to Israel, and then the first Beis Hamikdash, the first holy temple of Asheni, and the second Beis Hamikdash Rabbakodah, Mamish, and speedily actually so B'Mikdash Ashlishi, in the third holy temple, B'Mheir V'Yameinu Mamish, speedily nowadays actually so. L'chaim.